What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Okay, so getting into Sins of the Star Sapphire, this is actually the first of three, I believe it's three preludes to Blackest Night. The next one is Rage of the Red Lanterns, and then the one after that is Agent Orange, Larfleeze. Man, let me tell you something, dude, Larfleeze is so OP, it's not even funny. Dude, that guy's ridiculous. I mean, man. But yeah, like Sons of the Star Sapphire is interesting because again, when it comes to these prelude stories, it's like these small little tidbits that kind of get thrown in here and there. And really one of the most important characters that will really go into Blackest Night proper is actually a guy named Sarek. At least I think that's how you pronounce his name. It's S-A-A-R-E-K. Regardless, the story initially picks up with this guy. And the reason why is because we actually join with this kind of funeral ceremony for Green Lanterns who have died in battle. And this is actually really cool because it shows us what happens whenever they perish. Now keep in mind, there are some Green Lanterns that die and they never recover their corpses. And so as far as I'm able to tell, this ceremony is never held for a corpse that can't be recovered. But for those Lanterns who do die in battle, they're given this very, honorable thing in the sense that they're basically kind of stowed alongside all these other Lanterns who perished in conflict, and their story will be recorded in the Book of Oa as one of the many instances when the Green Lanterns were able to achieve a great goal. Because remember, for those of you guys who were just now joining us, we're coming out of the Sinestro Corps War. And so of course that covered the story where Thal Sinestro basically formed his own Lantern Corps and led to a massive war with the Green Lanterns that resulted in the Guardians of the Universe rewriting the Book of Oa to allow the Green Lanterns to kill both members of the Sinestro Corps as well as anybody who was an enemy of the Green Lanterns. And so again, that was a huge change because it was something that we had never seen before. Now with regards to Sarek himself, his introduction comes by way of not really interrupting this funeral service so much as partaking of it and basically being met by the arrival of the caretaker himself, basically the guy who's sort of in charge of all these different, funeral services and so on. And Sarek basically reveals that he has the telepathic ability to communicate with the dead. And this is why I say this is so important for Blackest Night, because as we know with Blackest Night, it's the resurrection of the dead. It's one of the reasons why I've timed a lot of this Green Lantern stuff so that Blackest Night will begin shortly before October and then run all the way through into Halloween. I thought it'd be kind of cool to do that, to do like Green Lantern Blackest Night every Sunday all throughout October. I thought it'd be kind of a cool little thing. But the fact remains here that with Sarek, his presence here is really one of intrigue and mystery more so than anything else, because remember, Lanterns don't usually display a power like this. Green Lantern rings complement the existing powers of, whatever being gets a Green Lantern ring, but there haven't really been any instances when a Lantern crops up and says, well, I can talk to the dead, because now it becomes a questionable thing. Now, the other half of this is what's going on with regards to Kyle Rayner and Guy Gardner, because remember, after the events of Sinestro Corps War, their idea was that they wanted to open a bar, which is actually pretty cool. It's a pretty cool thing to just kind of open a bar on Oa. But what they end up doing is talking about the whole idea of like Mongol and so on and so forth. Mongol being a guy who had basically attained several Yellow Lantern rings, but had been handed over to the Black Mercy plants to basically be consumed, to quite literally be physically digested. Now that's one of the reasons why we cover that story, because going into things like this, they'll touch back on that. And I wanted to be able at the very least to just kind of say, hey, look, here's where that video is. It's in the Green Lantern playlist. You're welcome to check it out. But what we end up finding out is that Mongol has basically escaped his captivity. And so what that means is that now we have a guy who in a lot of ways is on par with Superman in terms of his strength and so on, that has 5 Sinestro Corps rings. So it's kind of crazy in terms of the power that he possesses. But he actually won't play a very big role here. Again, this is Sins of the Star Sapphires, and so this is designed to focus more on the Star Sapphire Corps and the Green Lantern more so than anything else. But the cool thing about this is that it also hints at the idea that someone is traveling around and basically killing off all of the the various parents that belong to members of the Green Lantern Corps. And again, this is kind of a big deal because despite the fact that Thal Sinestro was defeated and the Sinestro Corps was defeated, they weren't destroyed in their entirety. They're all still very much alive, and the rings are still going out and pursuing new recruits for the Sinestro Corps. And so with the idea of someone traveling around and killing the parents of recruits who are part of the Green Lantern Corps, this presents a very dangerous situation. And the reason for this is because of the fact that with them fearing for the lives of their parents, the fact that the Sinestro Sinestro Corps is rooted in fear means that they could easily be pulled away from the Green Lanterns, inducted into the Sinestro Corps, and bolster the Sinestro Corps' numbers. But of course, what we end up doing is we basically pick up with Sarek after the fact that all these different eyes have just kind of been dropped down onto these members of the Green Lantern Corps when they learn their loved ones were being killed. And Sarek basically is able to go through the memories, so to speak, or at the very least speak to the dead through these eyes, and then in turn gain the identity of the person who's doing this. Now again, this is where the plot begins to thicken a little bit, and the reason for that is because of the fact that once the Green Lanterns are able to sort out who it is that's committing these actions, the question now becomes, who are these guys going to be? The other half of this is that because of the fact that so many of these new recruits have basically lost their parents, because they're not really forged in the fires of battle and therefore don't really have the willpower necessary to overcome virtually any and all fear, and the fact that they are so susceptible to the Sinestro Corps, they're stripped of their Green Lantern rings and they're basically thrown in isolation. Now again, this is one of the big failings of the Green Lantern Corps, and that's one of the things that we're going to see at the, once we get towards the conclusion of the story. But before we jump into that, we actually jump in with a character named Ice. Now normally we wouldn't really jump into this too much just because of the fact that she's here for a little bit, she talks to Guy Gardner for a little while, the two of them think about moving in, and then that's it. But Ice actually gives us a chance to sort of talk about this background with Guy Gardner, because Guy Gardner is a character that we haven't really discussed too much. We really haven't had a reason to outside of whatever it is that he's doing in any particular story that goes on. But Guy Gardner, really his rise in popularity came by way of Justice League International. But the idea of Justice League International was to basically take superheroes who couldn't normally sell their own comics, throw them onto a team, have them led by Batman in order to boost the team's popularity, and then sell comics. And it performed exceedingly well. It actually did a really good job. Guy Gardner was for the most part headstrong. He was a guy who just got in a fight with Batman, Batman punched him out, different things like that. But he also started forming relationships. And one of these relationships was with a girl named Ice, a girl named Tora Olafsdottir, I think is what her last name is. But she's very similar in terms of Iceman, in terms of, with regards to what her abilities are and so on and so forth, the ability to kind of manipulate ice and snow and so on and so forth. The idea was that this all really came out of the aftermath of Sinestro Corps War. With regards to Guy Gardner and Ice herself, the two of them had this sort of on-again, off-again relationship, but following Sinestro Corps War and him traveling back to Earth, the idea was to basically rekindle this romance that they had at some point along the line. And initially the response was, well, give me a little bit of time and we'll get things sorted out, which resulted in Guy Gardner basically retreating back to Oa for about a month or so in order for the two of them to basically get together and to have a date. Again, switching back over to, this being that's going around and killing these various parents that belong to members of the Green Lantern Corps, this was really more of a moral assault, more so than a physical assault. And the reason for this is because, again, historically speaking, when it comes to new recruits, they're very inexperienced. They don't really know how to deal with fear and, the Sinestro Corps and so on and so forth, but they're still also very easy to sway. And so the goal of these creatures, at least as it seems on the surface, was to go through, kill their parents, make these kids orphans, and in turn embolden them with fear and then make them members of the Sinestro Corps. But using the powers of Sarek, what ends up happening here is they not only learn that this one being has been doing this, but there have been a multitude of others who are all basically of the same race, who are all identical. Now, of course, this leads to the Green Lanterns tracking them down, killing them, and that's really the end of that, or at the very least, throwing them into science cells, and that's really the end of that. But the way that this begins to lead into the whole concept of Blackest Night comes by way of the Scarred Guardian. Now, as far as I'm aware, this Guardian doesn't actually have a name. They're just referred to as the Scarred Guardian. But the Guardian basically speaks directly with Sarek and just says, look, because of the fact that you can speak directly to the dead, your new assignment that you will tell nobody about is to go and find the corpse of the Anti-Monitor and find out what in the world is going on. Now, again, the reason why this matters is because following the events of Sinestro Corps War, one of the things that the Guardians had been questioning is why Sinestro had cropped up the way he did. And the other question was, what happened to the Anti-Monitor? Because remember, the Anti-Monitor is kind of like this harbinger of death for the multiverse. But when the Anti-Monitor had basically been defeated, or at the very least when the events of Sinestro Corps War had come to an end, the Anti-Monitor had been whisked away and then was effectively turned into a central power battery, or at least that seemed to be the case. And so the idea of the Guardians of the Universe is to find out what happened to this guy, what in the world happened to the Anti-Monitor, and where did he go? And so what we end up doing here is we jump into Sins of the Star Sapphire proper, and we basically just kind of pick up with, regards to Mongol still going on his rampage, that is to say, leaving the planet of the Black Mercies and then just taking off to the far side of the universe or whatever. But along the way, he comes across a couple and basically destroys their ship in the process, as well as kills one of them. Now again, this sets the stage for the idea of the Star Sapphires, and we'll talk a little bit more about them here in a second. But at the moment, one of the other things that we start focusing on here is the idea that some Green Lanterns out there are engaged in relationships with one another, whether they're guys and guys, girls and girls, guys and girls, whatever the case may be. They're all forming having their own relationships, their own, connections and so on and so forth. And some of them have gone so far as to procreate. Now, this was literally something the Green Lanterns were just given free rein on. There was really no limit to what it was that Green Lanterns could do with their own relationships. They could form friendships, they could form romantic attachments, so on and so forth. But in truth, when it came to the Green Lanterns, this was something that actually helped to forge willpower. This is something that gave them a reason to fight, because when you're a Green Lantern and you're a parent, if you're not fighting for anything, you're fighting for your kid. And so it always gave you the extra motivation that you needed to keep on keeping on. What we also end up finding out here is that in addition to these, aliens that have been captured and have been killing parents of Green Lantern Corps members, we also actually find out that someone's been going around and killing the parents of Green Lantern babies and then taking those babies away. But the introduction of the Star Sapphires starts to come by way of this particular woman whose husband was basically killed when Mongol attacked their ship. Now, this woman's name is actually Miri, but she's met with the Star Sapphires, and this begins to bolster the Star Sapphire ranks. Remember, we already talked about the whole introduction of Star Sapphires in the Jeff Johns Green Lantern run when Carol Ferris was brought in as one of their ranks. What seems to be going on here is that where previously the Star Sapphires just wanted like a queen, and they sent out this gem that would basically grab someone and make them the queen, what they're doing now is they're creating rings. And so the result is that these rings are now being sent out into the universe for the purpose of grabbing people. The difference here is that unlike the Green Lanterns, where these rings were made and then just dispersed across the cosmos and sent everywhere, instead, the Star Sapphires are far more conservative about how their rings get sent out and who it is that's able to use them. And so the result is that despite, Guy Gardner and Ice trying to have a bit of a relationship together, ultimately he's recalled back to the Guardians of the Universe and basically told that he, alongside Sodom Yat and a handful of others, are going to lead the Guardians on a mission to the Star Sapphire home planet of Zamaron. Now, again, for those of you guys who are new to the whole Jeff Johns Green Lantern thing, if you're just now joining our videos, with regards to the Star Sapphires, they were actually Guardians of the Universe at one point along the line. The difference here is that when the Guardians basically removed emotion from themselves, some of the female members of the Guardians disagreed with that and believed that love was the way by which life could continue on in any form of normalcy. And so the result was that they broke off and they traveled to the planet Zamaron, where they found that the love between a man and a woman resulted in the formation of this crystal of sorts. Now, this crystal was basically used by the Zamarons to form their central power battery and begin calling themselves the Star Sapphires. And this is what led into Carol Ferris, the girlfriend of Hal Jordan, being brought in as one of the Star Sapphires way back in the 1950s, 1960s, or no, not even then, maybe it was 1970s, whatever the case may be, when she was rolled into the Green Lantern mythos, as well as, her return and so on and so forth. But what we also end up finding out here is that where some of the members of the Sinestro Corps, where these rings had basically been captured by the Zamarons and so on and so forth, some of the female members had been taken by the Star Sapphires and brought in for the purpose of being reconditioned. And that's the nature of the Star Sapphires. What they basically do, because they believe that love is the absolute thing that can conquer all, the goal is to basically find individuals who are devoid of love or who they believe need love and can also serve as a member of their Lantern Corps, bring them in, and then effectively recondition them. And that's what they're doing with members of the Sinestro Corps. These female members that they've discovered, they basically say, look, they're filled with hate, they're filled with fear, so on and so forth, but we can change them. We can fill them with love. And when we do, they will be members of the Star Sapphires. But that's why I say, they don't just send out rings all willy-nilly to anybody who wants them. They don't just stand on a street corner and just say, you get a ring, and you get a ring, and you get a ring. Instead, they're a lot more conservative in terms of who gets them. And so again, it's really kind of a cool scenario, because what we end up finding out here is that there's basically irreconcilable differences. The goal of the Guardians of the Universe coming here was to basically say, look, you can't just go around creating your own Lantern Corps because you'll destabilize the universe. Love mutates, love changes. Sure, two people fall in love, and then somewhere along the line, they may end up breaking up. And because one of them is so in love, they go crazy and kill the other because they don't want the other person to be with anybody else. Just because something starts out good doesn't mean that it's going to stay good. And that's the whole basis behind the Guardians of the Universe devoiding themselves of emotion, is to basically make the case that just because something can be a certain way doesn't mean that it should be a certain way. But this is when we start to get into the nature of the fact that the Guardians of the Universe basically become their own enemies. Now, switching back over to who this person is that's going around and kidnapping these kids, it's actually a character by the name of Crib. And as far as I'm aware, this is the first introduction of Crib into the whole idea of the Green Lantern mythos. But what Crib's been basically doing is going around killing off the parents who were basically Green Lanterns, and then taking their kids with the intention of whisking these kids away and then raising them to become Sinestro Corps members to hate Green Lanterns. Now, this is not as though Crib is functioning in subservience to Sinestro. This is one of those instances where you see some existing ruler who's basically defeated, and then petty warlords start rising up. And for the most part, that's pretty standard. When Val Sinestro was still around before he was captured by the Green Lantern Corps, he was the absolute ruler. He was the guy who was running the show. But with his defeat, there was no one in control. And so what this did is it allowed different members of the Sinestro Corps to go around and start practicing their own agendas. And so this is really just kind of an example of how the Sinestro Corps is fragmented, but they're all still extremely dangerous. And what it is that makes Crib so dangerous is the fact that Crib can secrete these pheromones that will basically force other people to exist under its control. And so again, getting back into the Guardians themselves, the reason why they really become their own enemy in this particular story is because when they look at the Star Sapphires and they look at what the Star Sapphires are doing, they look at the actions that they're committing themselves to in terms of spreading love all throughout the universe and so on and so forth. Because the Guardians of the universe consider love to be a weakness and a failing and something that will inevitably lead somebody down the path of becoming a member of the Sinestro Corps, they effectively banish all relationships among Green Lanterns. And so anybody who's a member of the Green Lantern Corps cannot be in any kind of a romantic relationship whatsoever. They cannot date, they cannot procreate, none of that stuff. They have to remain totally isolated from one another, and the result of that is going to be exactly what you expect. But the fact remains here, with regards to Kyle Rayner and these various guys fighting against the character of Crib after realizing what it is that's going on, this coincides with Miri basically coming along and officially being inducted into the Star Sapphire Corps. And so the result is that her job is to effectively go out, find people who are trying to destroy love anywhere in the universe, and then bring them back to the planet of Zamaron. That's the nature of the Star Sapphires. It's almost like the Sinestro Corps. When a person is so strong that all they do is instill fear or something like that, they rule with an iron fist, or they make other people terrified of them, they're effectively a bully, a Sinestro Corps ring will suddenly pop up and say, such and such, you have the ability to instill great fear, welcome to the Sinestro Corps, that kind of a thing. The Zamarons will basically pop up with a ring that says, you know, you have the ability to create great love or whatever in the world that it is, and then whisk them off to become a member of the Star Sapphires. And so the result is that where things are popping off pretty readily, back with how, you know, Kyle Rayner and Crib and all these different guys and so on and so forth, there are two things that happen here. The first is that Kyle Rayner's willpower effectively overrides the control that Crib puts on him. This is yet another instance of really detailing the willpower of Kyle Rayner. There's a reason why he was the host of the willpower entity when he was Ion, because he is in a lot of ways the living embodiment of will. Now, of course, this is a role that'll be passed on to Hal Jordan in the New 52 going into DC Rebirth, but at this moment right now, in terms of how he acts, in terms of his total lack of fear, in terms of his ability to maintain his mental faculties in almost any situation, Kyle Rayner is effectively the embodiment of willpower. And this coincides with the arrival of Miri as a member of the Star Sapphires. And so again, because Star Sapphire rings are best utilized against Red Lantern rings, which they can basically shut down if they make a member of the Red Lanterns feel love, and because they cannot be affected by the Orange Lantern ring of Avarice, while they're not the most effective against Sinestro Corps rings, they're not like super effective against them, the actions of Miri here actually helps to sort of conquer Crib, just because of the fact that Miri's presence is indicative of the fact that Crib is basically trying to separate a mother from its baby. And so the result is that with the help of Miri as a Star Sapphire, the Green Lanterns are basically able to defeat Crib, and the result is that the baby is born pretty healthy, you know, or as healthy as a baby can be under this particular circumstance. But following this, what Miri also does is she actually invokes the desires of both Kyle Rayner as well as Saranac Natu, of course, the daughter of Sinestro. She basically says, look, the two of you all need love. Love is a necessity. Love is something that has to exist. And this again is kind of a funny situation, because what this does is it highlights the nature of Green Lanterns. Green Lanterns are not like the Guardians of the Universe. The Guardians of the Universe purge themselves of all emotion, but the Green Lanterns have not purged themselves of emotion. They feel anger, they feel love, they feel hate, they feel fear, which is why so many Green Lanterns are always in danger of falling to the Sinestro Corps, falling to the Red Lanterns, because of the fact that they feel emotion. And so the result is that Miri simply says, if you do not believe that love is necessary, then simply look into the gem of the Star Sapphire. I don't know what it'll show you, and neither of you know what it'll show the other. All you know is what you see. And we're not told explicitly what it is that Kyle Rayner or Saranac see. But the idea is that given what ends up happening later on with the two of them kind of bumping uglies, that they end up getting together, more or less. They just kind of see each other in love. But the biggest action of this, the biggest result of this particular circumstance, the fallout of the Guardians of the Universe effectively banishing love between the Green Lanterns, is that there are countless Green Lanterns, not really countless, but there are hundreds, if not thousands of Green Lanterns that abandon their post. They basically say, if I'm not allowed to be in a relationship with a person that I love, so long as I'm a Green Lantern, then I'm not going to be a Green Lantern. And again, this makes sense because remember, not everybody who was inducted into the Green Lantern Corps did it willingly. Not only that, a lot of people came from from their own lives. They basically had their own wives, their own husbands, they had their own families. They undertook that role because they felt a responsibility to keep the universe protected, and the power of the Green Lantern would ensure that their family's protected more so than they could just by using whatever natural talents they had. But their loyalty is to their friends and family, not to the Green Lanterns. And so what ends up happening here is that, again, because the fact that they're faced with this choice to either continue their relationships or abandon the Green Lantern Corps, they abandon the Green Lantern Corps. And this reduces their number by a pretty good margin in a pretty short amount of time. Now, those numbers will bolster and those numbers will go back up. But in the interim, Blackest Night is coming. And so the result is that the War of Light is going to be something to behold. It's going to be absolutely bonkers by the time it's all said and done. But at this point, we start to get out of the realm of the stories that are interesting but not the greatest, and we start to get into the stories that are really good, like Rage of the Red Lanterns and like Agent Orange. Oh man, dude, I love Larfleeze. But let me know down in the comment section, because I'm kind of curious. Let me know in the comment section which Lantern Corps is your favorite, because I'm kind of curious. I imagine a lot of people are going to say red. I imagine a lot of people are going to be like, yeah, man, those Red Lanterns, man, they're just pissed off all the time. I have no idea. But anyway, guys, we're going to go ahead and bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.